Humanity's entry into the Galactic Federation had been met with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. For centuries, the Federation had been an exclusive club of advanced alien civilizations, and humans were the new kids on the block. Captain Mark Thompson had been selected to represent Earth in a joint military exercise designed to test the mettle of this fledgling race. As he stood in the bustling hangar of the starship Vigilant, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched and judged. "Hey, rookie," a gruff voice broke through his thoughts. Mark turned to see Commander Qatar of the Arxians, a towering figure with reptilian features and a perpetually disapproving expression. "You better keep up. We don't have time to babysit a human." Mark forced a smile. "I'll do my best, Commander." Qatar's eyes narrowed. "See that you do. We're entering a live-fire exercise, and I don't want your inexperience costing lives." The briefing room was a mix of species, each more exotic than the last. Mark found a seat next to Lieutenant Alec Harper, a fellow human and old friend from their days at the Academy. Harper was a tech genius, with a knack for turning the tide of battle with his inventive gadgets. "Ready for this, Mark?" Harper asked, his voice tinged with excitement. "Ready as I'll ever be," Mark replied, scanning the room. "Feels like we're on display here." "Just another day in the Federation," Harper said, leaning back in his chair. "We'll show them what humans are made of." As the briefing began, Admiral Varak of the Elysians, a race known for their strategic brilliance, outlined the exercise. The coalition forces were to defend a simulated outpost against waves of drone attacks, testing their coordination and combat skills. Mark listened intently, committing every detail to memory. The team assignments were announced, and Mark was placed under Commander Qatar's command, along with Harper and a few other alien soldiers. Qatar's disdain was palpable, but Mark was determined to prove his worth. The exercise started with a flurry of activity. Drones swarmed the outpost, and the mixed teams sprang into action. Mark moved with precision, his rifle barking as he took down targets. Harper, meanwhile, deployed a series of defensive turrets, their automated fire providing crucial support. "Harper, cover the east flank," Mark shouted over the din of battle. "On it," Harper replied, his fingers dancing over his control pad. Qatar, observing Mark's coordination with Harper, couldn't hide his surprise. "Not bad, human, but this is just the beginning." The second wave of drones hit harder. The outpost's defenses were stretched thin, and casualties began to mount. Mark spotted a group of injured soldiers pinned down by enemy fire. He didn't hesitate. "Harper, I need a distraction," Mark called out. "Give me 10 seconds, Harper responded, his hands flying across his pad. A burst of light and smoke erupted near the drones, momentarily blinding them. Mark sprinted towards the injured soldiers, sliding into cover beside them. "We're getting you out of here," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. With practiced efficiency, he applied field dressings and administered pain relief. "Harper, I need extraction on my mark." "Ready when you are," Harper's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Go," Mark shouted, hoisting one of the injured over his shoulder. Harper activated a portable shield generator, creating a protective bubble that deflected incoming fire as they made their way back to safety. Commander Qatar watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable. The human rookie had just saved several lives, and he had done it with a level of skill and bravery that Qatar hadn't expected. As the exercise continued, Mark's leadership became increasingly evident. He coordinated strikes, provided support where needed, and maintained a calm demeanor under pressure. Harper was always at his side, his technical prowess a perfect complement to Mark's tactical acumen. After several grueling hours, the final wave of drones was repelled. The simulated outpost stood, battered but intact. The mixed team of humans and aliens gathered for a debriefing, exhaustion etched on their faces. Admiral Varak addressed the group. The exercise was a success, thanks in no small part to the efforts of Captain Thompson and Lieutenant Harper. Their actions today exemplify the potential for cooperation between our species. Mark glanced at Harper, who gave him a thumbs up. They had done it. They had shown that humans were more than capable of holding their own in the Federation. Commander Qatar approached them, his stern face softened by a grudging respect. "You performed well, Captain. Perhaps there is more to your species than I thought." "Thank you, Commander," Mark replied, extending his hand. Qatar hesitated for a moment before shaking it firmly. As the team dispersed, Harper clapped Mark on the back. "Not bad for a rookie, huh?" Mark laughed. "Let's see if we can keep up the pace. This is just the beginning." The two friends walked towards the barracks, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They knew that this was more than just a military exercise. It was the start of humanity's journey to earn its place among the stars. The simulated outpost exercise had barely concluded when alarms blared throughout the starship Vigilant. The ship's intercom crackled to life with the urgent voice of Admiral Virak. "All personnel to battle stations. We are under attack by an unknown enemy force. This is not a drill." Mark Thompson and Alec Harper exchanged quick glances. "Looks like we're diving straight into the deep end," Mark said, strapping on his combat gear with practiced speed. "No rest for the wicked," Harper replied, slinging his equipment bag over his shoulder. The corridors of the Vigilant were a flurry of activity as soldiers and crew members scrambled to their stations. Mark and Harper, joined by Commander Qatar and the rest of their team, headed to the briefing room for their orders. Admiral Virak stood at the central console, projecting an image of the attacking force, a menacing fleet of Zarn warships known throughout the galaxy for their brutality and relentless assaults. "The Zarn have breached our perimeter defenses and are moving in fast. We need all hands on deck to repel their boarding parties. Captain Thompson, Lieutenant Harper, you will lead a strike team to secure the engine room. We cannot allow the Zarn to disable our ship." "Understood, Admiral," Mark replied, his voice steady. As the team moved out, Qatar walked alongside Mark. "The Zarn are formidable foes, Captain. This will be a true test of your abilities." "We'll handle it," Mark said with quiet confidence. They reached the engine room, finding it already under siege. Zarn soldiers, their exoskeletons gleaming under the harsh lights, were forcing their way through the bulkhead. Mark quickly assessed the situation, issuing rapid commands. "Harper, set up defensive turrets at the main entry points. Qatar, take your squad and cover the left flank. I'll take the right." The team sprang into action, moving with a precision born of intense training. Harper's turrets hummed to life, their automated fire creating a barrier that slowed the Zarn advance. Qatar's squad laid down a suppressive fire, pinning the Zarn soldiers in place. Mark led his own squad in a flanking maneuver, using the chaotic environment to his advantage. He moved like a shadow, his rifle picking off targets with deadly accuracy. A Zarn soldier lunged at him, its claws slicing through the air where Mark had stood moments before. With a swift counter, Mark drove his combat knife into a chink in the Zarn's armor, dropping it instantly. "Keep pushing! We need to clear this area!" Mark shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony of battle. Harper's voice came through the comms. "Mark, I'm detecting an energy spike in the engine core. The Zarn are trying to overload it." Mark's mind raced. "Harper, can you shut it down remotely?" "Not from here. Someone needs to get to the control panel inside the core room." "All right, I'll go. Cover me," Mark ordered, sprinting towards the core room, bullets and plasma bolts whizzing past him. Harper and Qatar provided covering fire, holding the line against the Zarn onslaught. Mark reached the core room, diving behind a console for cover. The control panel was on the far side, but the room was swarming with Zarn soldiers. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. There was no time for hesitation. "Harper, Qatar, I'm going in. Hold them off as long as you can," Mark said into his comm, then broke cover, dashing towards the panel. Zarn soldiers turned, firing in his direction. Mark zigzagged, making himself a difficult target. He reached the panel, fingers flying over the controls. Alarms blared as he initiated the shutdown sequence. Come on," he muttered under his breath, willing the system to respond faster. A Zarn soldier charged at him, claws extended. Mark grabbed a nearby wrench, swinging it with all his might. The blow landed squarely on the Zarn's head, staggering it. He followed up with a series of rapid strikes, finally bringing the creature down. "Mark, we can't hold them much longer." Harper's voice was strained. "Almost there," Mark shouted back, entering the final command sequence. The engine core's hum began to lower as the overload sequence was interrupted. "We're clear," Mark yelled, turning just in time to see a Zarn soldier bearing down on him. Before he could react, a plasma bolt struck the Zarn in the chest, sending it sprawling. Mark looked up to see Qatar, rifle smoking, standing over him. "Don't get yourself killed, rookie." "Thanks, Qatar," Mark said, getting to his feet. Together, they made their way back to the rest of the team, who had managed to push the remaining Zarn soldiers out of the engine room. Admiral Virak's voice came through the comms. "Excellent work, Captain Thompson. The Zarn are retreating. Prepare for debriefing." Mark and Harper exchanged a weary but triumphant look. They had survived their first real test, and their performance had exceeded even their own expectations. As they regrouped with the rest of the team, Qatar approached Mark. "You fought well, human. Perhaps you're not as green as I thought." "High praise coming from you, Commander." Mark replied with a grin. Harper clapped Mark on the shoulder. Looks like we passed the baptism by fire, huh? Mark nodded. Yeah, but this is just the beginning. The Zarn won't give up that easily. Then we'll be ready for them, Qatar said, a determined glint in his eyes. Together, the team walked towards the debriefing room, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They knew that the road would be tough, but they were united by a common goal, to protect the Federation from any threat, no matter how formidable. After repelling the Zarn's initial assault, the coalition forces prepared for a prolonged conflict. Intelligence reports indicated that the Zarn were regrouping for a more significant strike, likely aiming to seize control of strategic locations within the Galactic Federation's space. Given the threat level, Mark Thompson was appointed to lead a specialized task force designed to intercept and neutralize Zarn forces before they could launch their next offensive. The atmosphere in the strategy room aboard the Vigilant was tense as Mark and his team reviewed the battle plans. Next to him stood Commander Qatar, his former skeptic, now a firm supporter, and Lieutenant Harper, always ready with his tech-driven solutions. Here's the situation, Mark began, pointing to the holographic star map floating above the table. Intel suggests the Zarn fleet will attempt to breach the Federation's outer defenses here, he said, indicating a cluster of stars known as the Tirius sector. Our mission is to intercept them. Qatar grunted, his scaly face set in a grim line. The Tirius sector is a labyrinth of asteroid fields and nebulae. It could work to our advantage, he mused, tapping a clawed finger against his chin. Harper chimed in, his eyes alight with strategic fervor. If we set up ambush points within the asteroid fields, I can deploy a series of proximity mines and automated drones. It'll give us the upper hand in maneuverability and surprise. Good, Mark nodded approvingly. Let's make sure those Zarn don't see it coming. We'll split into 3 squadrons. Qatar, you take the left flank. Harper, you're with me on the right. We'll need fast, precise strikes to keep them disoriented. Hours later, the task force arrived in the Tirius sector, their ships cloaked by the cosmic dust of the nebulae. Mark's squadron hovered near a particularly dense asteroid cluster, the silence of space a stark contrast to the storm they were about to unleash. As if on cue, the Zarn fleet emerged from hyperspace, their ships sleek and menacing. Here they come, Mark breathed into his comm. Hold positions until my mark. The Zarn, unaware of the ambush, advanced toward the Federation's defensive line. Mark waited, his gaze fixed on the approaching enemy. Now, he whispered, and a flurry of torpedoes erupted from the asteroid field, striking the Zarn vanguard with devastating precision. Chaos ensued as the Zarn fleet scrambled to locate the source of the attack. Qatar's squadron launched from the left flank, pummeling the Zarn with heavy artillery, while Harper activated his mines and drones, further sowing confusion among the enemy ranks. Mark led his squadron in a sweeping arc, picking off Zarn ships that had been damaged in the initial onslaught. Each hit was a small victory, but he knew the battle was far from over. Qatar, push forward. Harper, how are those drones holding up? Mark called, his voice calm amid the chaos. Working like a charm, Harper replied, his hands flying over his controls. I'm sending the second wave of drones now. As the battle raged, Mark's tactics proved effective. The Zarn, notorious for their relentless aggression, were unprepared for the Coalition's guerrilla warfare. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn in their favor. During a lull in the fighting, Mark's ship was suddenly jolted by a direct hit. Warning alarms blared, and his console sparked with electrical fire. Damage report, he shouted, gripping his seat as his ship listed to one side. Shields down to 30%, hull integrity compromised, reported his co-pilot, her voice tense but controlled. Mark peered through the viewport, spotting a squadron of Zarn fighters regrouping for another strike. Not today, he muttered, seizing the manual controls. With a skilled hand, he maneuvered his damaged ship behind a large asteroid, narrowly avoiding another volley of enemy fire. Harper, I need cover, he called. Got it, Mark, deploying smokescreen and countermeasures. A cloud of metallic chaff and dense smoke billowed from Harper's ship, cloaking Mark's position. Seizing the opportunity, Mark executed a daring move, piloting his ship in a tight loop around the asteroid and emerging behind the Zarn fighters. Before they could react, he fired, taking out 2 of the enemy ships in a brilliant explosion. Nice shot, Qatar roared over the comm, his voice filled with grudging respect. As the remnants of the Zarn fleet retreated, battered and beaten, Mark allowed himself a brief smile. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Regroup and prepare for the next engagement, he ordered. "This fight is just beginning." Back aboard the Vigilant, Mark's leadership was praised by Admiral Varak, who viewed the victory not just as a tactical success, but as a sign of humanity's rising prominence within the Federation. Mark, however, remained focused on the challenges ahead, knowing that each battle forged the path to ultimate victory. After their victory in the Tirius sector, Mark Thompson and his team returned to the Vigilant for a brief respite. The ship was buzzing with activity and a growing sense of optimism. However, the damage inflicted during the battle was severe, and the crew's morale was beginning to wane as the reality of a prolonged conflict settled in. In the mess hall, the atmosphere was subdued. Soldiers from various species sat in small clusters, their conversations low and punctuated by long silences. Mark noticed the change in spirit and knew he had to act. He stood up, his chair scraping against the metal floor, drawing the eyes of the room. "Listen up, everyone," Mark began, his voice carrying across the hall. "I know we're tired. I know we've all lost friends, and I know it feels like this might never end. But I've seen what we're capable of. Together, we've held the line against the Zarn, and we've pushed them back. That's not just luck. It's skill, it's courage, and it's determination." He paused, making eye contact with several of his fellow soldiers. "The Zarn think they can scare us into submission, but they don't know us. They don't know what we're fighting for. We're not just defending territory here. We're fighting for our homes, our families, for a future where we can all coexist peacefully." Commander Qatar stood, joining Mark at the front of the room. "Captain Thompson is right," he said, his deep voice resonating. "I've fought alongside many of you. I've seen your bravery. And while we may come from different worlds today, we fight for the same cause. Let's show the Zarn that their aggression will not be tolerated. Let's fight not just to survive, but to win." Inspired by the words of both leaders, the soldiers began to respond, their energy shifting. Conversations sparked anew, this time with a focus on tactics and determination rather than losses and fatigue. Mark and Qatar left the mess hall together, heading towards the strategy room. "We need to keep this momentum going," Mark said. "Let's plan our next move." In the strategy room, Lieutenant Harper was already setting up for the briefing. "Got something that might interest you, Mark," Harper said, pulling up data on the screen. "Based on the patterns of the Zarn's previous attacks, I think I've identified a potential target for their next strike." Mark studied the data. "If we can preempt their strike, we could not only save countless lives but possibly end this conflict sooner." The room filled with senior officers and strategists from various allied species. Mark outlined a daring offensive strategy, proposing to take the battle directly to a key Zarn outpost. His plan detailed covert operations, sabotage, and a full frontal assault, leveraging their newfound morale and tactical advantage. The officers exchanged looks, some skeptical, others nodding in agreement. Finally, Admiral Varak, who had been listening intently, spoke. "It's a bold plan, Captain Thompson. But boldness is what we need right now. Prepare your teams. We strike at dawn." The following morning, as the first glimmers of light from the nearby star peered through the darkness of space, Mark's task force readied themselves. Ships were loaded, weapons were checked, and soldiers said their quiet goodbyes, not knowing what the day would bring. Mark boarded his ship, feeling the weight of command on his shoulders. He looked over at his crew, their faces resolute. "This is it," he said. "Today, we make a stand. For our friends, for our families, for our future. Let's do this." As the fleet departed the Vigilant, heading towards the Zarn outpost, there was a palpable sense of unity and purpose. They were ready to fight, to turn the tide of the war in their favor, inspired by a leader who had shown them that even in the darkest times, there was hope and a reason to fight. In the dark vastness of space, the Coalition fleet, led by Captain Mark Thompson, moved stealthily toward the Zarn outpost identified by Lieutenant Harper's intelligence. The outpost, located on a remote asteroid in the Vale Nebula, served as a critical hub for the Zarn's logistical and command operations. If Mark and his task force could incapacitate this stronghold, they could severely cripple the Zarn's ability to wage war. As the fleet approached the asteroid, the cold metallic surfaces of the spacecraft mirrored the tension inside. Mark stood on the bridge of the lead ship, his eyes fixed on the holographic displays showing their progress. Beside him, Harper monitored the communication channels, ensuring that their approach remained undetected. "Distance to target?" Mark asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. 3 minutes to optimal firing range, replied the pilot, her hands deftly maneuvering the controls. Mark turned to Commander Qatar and the rest of his strike team assembled on the bridge. Once we're in range, we'll execute a full-scale assault. Harper's drones will disable their communications first. Then we hit them with everything we've got. Qatar, your team will breach the outpost and plant the explosives. I'll cover your 6. Qatar nodded, his expression resolute. We will not fail, he affirmed. The silence that followed was interrupted only by the soft hum of the ship's engines and the occasional beep from the navigation system. Every crew member knew their role and the high stakes of their mission. As they neared the asteroid, Harper gave the signal, and a swarm of drones surged forward, disappearing into the darkness toward the Zarn outpost. Moments later, the communication channels flickered and went silent. The outpost was blind and deaf. Now, Mark commanded. The fleet unleashed a barrage of laser fire and missiles. Explosions blossomed on the surface of the asteroid as the outpost's defensive shields flared and sputtered under the onslaught. Qatar's team, in heavily armored suits, launched from the airlock, propelling themselves through the vacuum toward the breached defenses of the outpost. Mark, in his own suit, followed close behind, his rifle at the ready. They entered the outpost through a gaping hole torn open by the missiles. Inside, the corridors were chaotic, alarms blaring and lights flickering. Zarn soldiers, surprised and disorganized, scrambled to mount a defense. The coalition forces pressed forward, exchanging fire with the defending troops. Mark and Qatar moved with precision, their years of combat experience evident in every move. They covered each other's advances, neutralizing enemy combatants as they made their way deeper into the outpost. "Explosive charges set," came a voice over the comm. It was one of Qatar's team members, positioned at the outpost's core. "Ready to blow on your command, Captain?" Mark glanced at Qatar, who nodded in approval. "Do it," Mark ordered. The charges detonated, sending shockwaves through the outpost. Structural beams groaned and debris clouded the corridors. As the dust settled, the sound of collapsing metal echoed through the hollowed chambers. "We need to move, now!" Mark shouted. They retraced their steps back to the breach, moving quickly as the outpost began to come apart around them. Once they were safely back aboard their ship, Mark watched the outpost on the viewing screen, now just a mangled wreck on the asteroid's surface. It was a significant blow to the Zarn, one that would surely take them time to recover from. As the fleet regrouped and prepared to return to the Vigilant, Mark felt a mixture of triumph and relief. They had achieved their objective, but he knew the Zarn would retaliate. This victory was a critical turning point in the war, but the conflict was far from over. Back on the bridge as they set course for their rendezvous with the Vigilant, Mark addressed his crew, pride evident in his voice. "Today, we delivered a significant blow to the Zarn's war efforts. Your bravery and precision saved countless lives. Rest up and stay sharp. The fight continues, but we're in this together, and we're in it to win." As the stars streaked past, the crew's morale was high, their faith in their captain stronger than ever. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united under Mark's command. The victory at the Zarn outpost had sent ripples through the ranks of both the coalition forces and the Zarn. As strategic reports poured in showing a significant slowdown in Zarn operations, morale among the coalition soared. However, Captain Mark Thompson was aware that this was the calm before the storm. The Zarn would undoubtedly retaliate with ferocity. Back aboard the Vigilant, Mark convened with his senior officers and allies in the war room. Commander Qatar and Lieutenant Harper were present, along with several other key military figures from the coalition forces. "We've dealt the Zarn a serious blow, but we cannot underestimate their capacity for recovery and retaliation," Mark began, his tone serious as he addressed the room. "We need to be proactive, strike where they least expect, and cripple their ability to launch a counteroffensive." Harper chimed in with his latest intelligence analysis. "Our surveillance drones have picked up increased activity around the Draval system. It appears the Zarn are amassing a large fleet, possibly preparing for a direct assault on Federation sectors." Qatar's eyes narrowed. "Draval system is a strategic choke point. If they take control of it, they'll have access to multiple Federation trade routes. We can't let that happen." Mark nodded in agreement. "That's our next target. We will intercept them there. It's time to end this." Plans were swiftly put into motion. The coalition fleet, bolstered by reinforcements and fresh supplies, set course for the Draval system. The journey was tense, each member of the crew acutely aware of the impending battle that could very well determine the fate of the war. As they arrived in the system, the scale of the Zarn fleet became apparent. Hundreds of warships were assembled, more than the coalition had anticipated. Mark assessed the situation, his strategic mind calculating the best approach. "This is it," Mark addressed his crew. "Stay sharp, focus on the mission. We fight not just for victory, but for peace." The battle commenced with a barrage of firepower from both sides. Space was alight with the blasts of cannons and the destructive dance of warships maneuvering through debris and laser fire. Mark commanded from the bridge, issuing orders with calm precision, his presence a stabilizing force for his crew. Meanwhile, Harper worked feverishly, deploying cyber attacks to disrupt the Zarn's communications and weapon systems. "Got them! Their shields are down temporarily," Harper announced, a triumphant grin on his face. Seizing the opportunity, Mark directed the fleet to concentrate their fire on the flagship of the Zarn Armada. The ship sustained severe damage, its hull rupturing under the relentless assault. "Boarding parties, go," Mark commanded. Teams of specialized soldiers, including Qatar's elite unit, jetted across the void to enter and seize control of the crippled flagship. Inside the flagship, fierce hand-to-hand combat ensued. Qatar led his troops through the corridors, overcoming the Zarn soldiers with brutal efficiency. Their goal was to capture the Zarn commander, hoping to end the battle by cutting off the head of the snake. After intense fighting, Qatar and his team reached the command center, confronting the Zarn commander. The standoff was tense, with the outcome uncertain until Mark, joining the fray, disarmed the Zarn commander with a precise shot. With their leader captured and their flagship seized, the Zarn fleet descended into disarray. The coalition forces pressed their advantage, and soon the remaining Zarn ships were either retreating or surrendering. The battle for the Draval system was a decisive victory. It marked a significant turning point in the war, with the Zarn's ability to threaten the Federation severely diminished. The coalition celebrated, their cheers echoing through the halls of the Vigilant. Later, in the aftermath of the battle, Mark and Qatar stood watching the stars from the observation deck. "We've come a long way since that first skirmish," Qatar remarked, a rare smile crossing his features. Mark nodded, his eyes on the vastness of space. "We did it together," he said. "This victory isn't just mine, or yours. It belongs to all of us." As the fleet prepared to return to Federation space, there was a sense of unity and hope. The war might not be over, but the end was now in sight, and for the first time, peace seemed more than just a distant dream. With the Zarn's main fleet in disarray after the decisive victory at the Draval system, the coalition forces had gained the upper hand. The Federation was now in a position to launch a final assault, targeting the heart of the Zarn's military operations. This mission, if successful, would effectively end the Zarn threat and bring long-awaited peace to the galaxy. Captain Mark Thompson, alongside Commander Qatar and Lieutenant Harper, was at the forefront of planning this critical strike. The target was the Zarn's primary command center, located on a heavily fortified planet in the Zeta Quadrant. The planet was ringed with defense platforms and patrolled by what remained of the Zarn fleet, a formidable barrier to any invading force. In the strategy room aboard the Vigilant, Mark outlined the plan to his assembled officers and strategic allies. "Our objective is clear," he began, his gaze sweeping over the room. "We disable the planet's defenses, infiltrate the command center, and capture or eliminate the Zarn High Command. This operation will require precision, bravery, and unwavering resolve." Harper chimed in with technical details. "I've developed a new type of electronic warfare drone that can disrupt the planet's defense network. It'll give us a window to slip through their outer defenses." Qatar, who had developed a grudging respect for Mark's tactics, added, "My warriors are prepared to lead the ground assault. We will not falter." As the fleet approached the Zarn planet, the air was tense with anticipation. Every crew member knew the stakes of the mission they were about to undertake. Mark, standing on the bridge of the Vigilant, watched as the planet grew larger in their view screens. He turned to his crew, his voice steady and commanding. "This is it. Let's finish this war." The initial phase of the assault went as planned. Harper's drones successfully disabled the Zarn's orbital defenses, creating chaos in their communications. With the defense platforms offline, the coalition ships broke through the orbital blockade and deployed ground forces to the surface. The battle on the ground was fierce. Qatar and his warriors, supported by Mark's tactical squads, fought their way towards the command center, encountering stiff resistance from the Zarn defenders. the landscape was chaotic, with the roar of gunfire and the clash of hand-to-hand combat filling the air. Mark led a team directly into the heart of the command center, using both stealth and force to overcome the guards. As they breached the final defenses, they found themselves in a massive control room facing the Zarn High Command. A tense standoff ensued. Mark stepped forward, his weapon trained on the Zarn commander. "This ends now," he declared. "Surrender and end this pointless conflict." The Zarn commander, surrounded and defeated, had no choice but to surrender. As the coalition forces secured the command center, the news of the capture spread quickly. Without their leadership, the remaining Zarn forces ceased fighting, effectively ending their campaign of aggression. The victory was celebrated across the galaxy. The Vigilant and her crew were hailed as heroes, and Mark Thompson was recognized not just as a military leader, but as a symbol of the resilience and courage of the coalition forces. In the aftermath of the battle, Mark and his allies gathered in the command center, now under coalition control. Looking around at the faces of those who had stood by him through the toughest of times, Mark felt a profound sense of accomplishment and relief. "We did it," he said to the group. "Thanks to each of you, this victory is yours." Qatar clapped Mark on the shoulder, a gesture of respect between warriors. "You have led well, human. I am honored to have fought beside you." Harper grinned, wiping a smear of dirt from his face. "So what's next, Captain? After a bit of peace, of course." Mark laughed, the sound mingling with the cheers of his crew in the background. "For now, let's enjoy this victory. Peace has been a long time coming." As they left the command center to join the celebrations, Mark looked out at the stars, now a little brighter with the promise of peace. The war was over, and though the road to recovery would be long and filled with challenges, for the first time in years, there was hope for a peaceful future. As the dust of war settled over the galaxy, the monumental victory orchestrated by Captain Mark Thompson and the coalition forces marked a new era of peace and reconstruction. The cessation of hostilities with the Zarn and their formal surrender had opened avenues for diplomatic endeavors and rebuilding the war-torn regions of space. On board the Vigilant, now docked at the newly established Peace Conference station orbiting the serene planet of Alarion, Mark found himself in a role he had never envisioned. From a soldier tasked with defending humanity to a key figure in the peace negotiations, his journey was a testament to his adaptability and leadership. The Grand Hall of the conference station was abuzz with representatives from all the member species of the Galactic Federation, including the Zarn, who were now negotiating the terms of their integration into the Federation as a peaceful power. Mark, dressed in his formal uniform, moved through the hall, exchanging greetings and words of gratitude with various diplomats and officers. Admiral Virak approached Mark, a smile of genuine respect on his face. "Captain Thompson, your leadership has not only won this war, but has also paved the way for a lasting peace. The Federation is in your debt." "Thank you, Admiral," Mark replied, nodding respectfully. "It was a collective effort. I was merely part of a remarkable team that stood together against the odds." As the final session of the day concluded, Mark was invited to speak to the assembly about his vision for the future. Standing at the podium, he looked out over the sea of faces, each representing a world, a culture, a history. He cleared his throat and began. "Today, we stand at the threshold of a new chapter in our shared history. The war has shown us the worst of what we can become, but in its ending, we see the best of what we can achieve together. Let us move forward not as separate species divided by memories of conflict, but as united beings with a common goal of peace and prosperity." The applause that followed was not just in appreciation of his words, but a celebration of the new alliances that had been forged in the crucible of conflict. After the speech, as the hall slowly emptied, Mark was joined by Commander Qatar and Lieutenant Harper. "Never thought I'd see you give a speech to diplomats, Mark," Harper said with a chuckle. Mark laughed. "Neither did I. It's easier to face plasma fire than a room full of politicians." Qatar grunted in agreement. "You have done well, Mark. Our people respect you, not just as a warrior, but as a leader of peace." "It's a new kind of challenge," Mark admitted, "but one I'm ready to take on with you all by my side." The trio then moved to the station's observatory deck, where the stars shone brightly against the backdrop of the vast galaxy. They stood in silence, each lost in their thoughts about the past and the dreams for the future. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice soft, yet filled with determination. "The war is over, but our work continues. We've been given a chance to make a difference, to ensure that the peace we've fought so hard for lasts. And maybe, just maybe, we can build something even greater than what was before. Harper nodded, his eyes reflecting the starlight. With you leading the way, I believe we can. The three friends looked out into the cosmos, their hearts lighter than they had been in years. The galaxy was vast and full of unknowns, but for the first time, the future seemed filled with hope rather than uncertainty. As they returned to the celebration, the cheers and music echoing through the halls of the station, Mark felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had not only secured victory in battle, but had also earned the respect of both friends and former foes. The path ahead would require diplomacy, patience, and unwavering leadership. But Captain Mark Thompson was ready to guide humanity and its allies into this promising new era.